So if you guys want to just follow along, or if you want to just download the code here under tutorials. So go ahead and download this, or if you want to follow along. And so basically, we're trying to kind of put together components of this example, right? So currently we have an example which is using a city, and that city could be anywhere. And in this case, I have, for instance, 2 instances of Manhattan. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to print the temperature and humidity as a value here. So the code that is in the tutorial, you can just replace it with the code for this example. And if you're replacing the code, you want to make sure that in the main game object, you're relinking this code. So relinking is something that sometimes you actually have to do. Sometimes if you have variables here, if they don't appear, or sometimes relinking when you're opening an example is also a good idea. So you can just right click, remove the component. And once you have the code pasted here in this example, the main, which is kind of, we're looking at this as the engine for the example, you can just either go to add component and look for the C# script. But more easily, you can just, once you have this activated, just drag it over here, and it's going to add you to your example. Okay, so what we are doing here, we're creating 2 public variables here. One is temperature text, the other one is humidity text. And each of these are corresponding to a text object, which is part of the UI component of Unity that we're going to be able to link. So Unity itself has a series of default UI components that you can use. And yesterday, NJ went over some general UI components. So a UI component could be a button, it could be text, it could be an image. So there's many different ways that you can interact. So in this case, what we want to use is a generic text component. And because there's 2 variables that I want to print, I have 2 text components. So that's what you see here. So you can go to your game object, you can go to UI, create 2 text components, and you can call this whatever you want. And the renaming is completely up to you. You just need to make sure that every time that you rename it, you just keep track of it, and it's kind of corresponding to what the value is. So go ahead and create 2 game objects that are UI and of text. And when you have a UI object here, if you select it and do F, you'll see that it also comes with a canvas. And within that canvas, you have some flexibility. So for instance, here you can edit whatever the text is. So in this case, I could say hello world. Whatever that might be. And in this case, I have 2. So there's that. There's hello world 2. And obviously, then each of these have their own, let's say, variables you can change from size to color, etc. And these are properties that we can access from Unity. But for us to be able to access functionalities of the UI, we need to make sure that we're calling Unity Engine's UI capability. So if you open the code, you'll see that basically you need to be able to call the UI functionalities. And after that, you're able to access different components such as text, such as image, etc. So if you're using the downloaded code, this should be already there. Now, this code that's given to you, basically, it's using two functionalities. So in this case, it's calling these two public variables. So one is public variable temperature text, the other one humidity. And what we're going to pass on to these two is basically two variables that we could get from the open weather, right? So in this case, two variables that initially we were printing in the console. So these are information that we can pass on and print as text. So what's important for these two lines is the fact that not only we're passing that information as text, but when we are getting the information from the server, we need to make sure that we just convert that to a string, right? So then this way they're able to be printed on the UI. One other also component here is that basically we're adding one more debugging component of the previous example to humidity. So in the previous example, we were only printing temperature, but in this case, we can also do humidity. So usually temperature and humidity are variables that completely are interconnected and change the way that you feel about a temperature. So if you scroll down, you'll see that in information that we're able to get from open weather, not only you have temperature, but you have this parameter called feels like. And the feels like is usually what the combination of temperature with humidity will make you feel like. So maybe it's a little bit lower, but because of high humidity, it makes you feel like it's higher than what it is. There's other variables as well, such as pressure, etc. But for this example, we're only printing two. So once you have this, the only thing we need to link, and whether this is new variable that you're creating here, we just need to make sure that I'm going to delete these two, that once you have your code drag and drop to the main, you just need to make sure that these two variables are also linked. So these are my texts, and I can name them as temp text, display, or whatever I like. I just need to make sure that I just drag and drop temperature to temperature and humidity to humidity, right? Otherwise, these two components are not going to be linked together. So we're accessing Unity's UI capability. We are taking what was initially printed in the console, and we are converting the data to string format so it could actually communicate with text functionality of the UI. And in this case, the idea is to just display it over the city. So if I go ahead and play this, it's nothing really too exciting, but what's nice is the fact that actually you're able to look at this information. What is really exciting about this example is the fact that by just changing name of the city in our inspector, so instead of New York, if I just change this to, let's say, Beijing, I'm going to be able to change the readings, right? So basically, each of you took a different part of world that you imported from Melbourne to, let's say, different parts. And all you need to do is to just basically specify an inspector which city it is that you're trying to visualize, and we're able to print the data over it. So obviously, if we printed two, we can print more, and that information could turn to other things, which is what NJ was showing earlier with the globe example, right? So in that example, you're taking the values and that turns to color and that turns to scale. So this is where we're starting to then talk about more of subjectivity. What is it that you're trying to convey? And then based on that, what is the information that we're trying to show? So I want to see if everybody is able to get this example working. So ideally, you have a city. You're able to then print temperature and humidity of that city over it. As a summary, we have a main game object. This was an empty game object as a placeholder for kind of the engine of the scene. And we have the main script connected here. You can just drag and drop. If you don't see this public variables, you can just remove it and connect again. Then you have two UI components. So under game object, you have two text UI components, and I renamed one temperature text display. You can click over it and change the name. And then in your main inspector, you just drag and drop these to where they belong to. So then it's showing the correct information. Now, if I were to click on this, and if I were to just look at the UI before I run this, because by default you can have a text also associated with this, as just instead of it being empty, I'm just asking what is the temperature, what is the humidity, and then this way, you know, when I'm troubleshooting, when I'm looking at this, I know that when it's running, it's those variables that we're looking at. Obviously, if you want to say other things, so for instance, temperature is temperature, today's temperature, or whatever that variable could be, you would just go back to the string and change that fixed part of the code. So that's this bit. So you're saying take this variable and string this together. As part of that is what is fixed and what is basically coming from the server. So instead of temperature column, I could say temperature is, and I have a space here. So however you want to do the wording, then you can update that. And go from there.
So I can ask you again.
Yeah, please.
What's the kind of the child objects of Canvas?
Oh, sure. So the child of the canvas is two text components. So so you don't necessarily. So the canvas, I am using a UI canvas as just to make it a little bit easy to do, and then the child is two text components.
Okay.
And each of these text components, I'm not changing anything other than just what is being printed. One thing you might want to do with text object, there is this option that says best fit. So best fit, it kind of just takes your entire view and it adjusts the size. But I have it one fixed, check for one and not for the other. It kind of depends on the organization and what you want. So in this case, it says best fit. So it's trying to match the humidity scale to the temperature. If I uncheck that, then basically it would just rely on the scale, which is what we're identifying here. So it's completely up to you.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
So this tile, it's not geolocated.
Nice.
So
yeah.
In this case, we're showing just one piece of data.
Exactly. So good question. So basically what we are basing this off of, if you remember when we were looking at open weather. So open weather right now, if we're looking at maps, so for New York, this is the weather data of New York, of this location. In this case. So if I want to go a little bit higher, I can say Manhattan. So, so these are kind of weather stations that are buried in the city. So it's kind of roughly the same location just based on this.
Yeah, but let's say if I found a data set that is more like at a smaller scale,
and yeah, then we can just plot. So similar to the previous example from yesterday, that the geolocation can be plotted. Now the issue is this: this example doesn't have the right scale, right? So this is our map is not to the right scale. So if I do, let's say if I get 2 coordinates, right, which is like one here, just to get the them plotted, that's not going to match. So what you need to do in this case is a translation. So this is quite common actually for a lot of the AR projects that are basically with a lot of AR, as you guys know, for instance, with HoloLens, there's only so much you could see, right? That when you're trying to fit that so much you could see with geolocation, etc., so it doesn't match. So what you need to do in this case is in Unity environment, plot to longitude and latitude. And these are going to be really like irrelevant to what we have, right? Because this needs to be towards the center. So this is going to be long, lat 1, long, lat 2. And this is going to give us a vector, right? So this is our vector 1. And the second vector, we need to, in this case, it's still going to be manual, right? Because over this model, I still don't know where the weather stations are. I can go and do research and find out, okay, roughly this is this street and that street. So then this is going to give me my target translation. Then I need to do a translation between this vector to this vector. Now, the problem here could be if these are not the same projection planes. So if these are Google base, so Google base is going to be WGS 84 for most of the projections, then they're roughly going to match. But if they're not, like, let's say, the data that you're getting, if it's using state projection, they might not match, right? But that translation is kind of from one vector to another. So that's definitely possible, especially for a lot of, let's say, AR stuff, which is I have a HoloLens. This is all I could see. So I cannot, have something that's here and something that's here, right? You need to change that scale.